Thank you, everybody. It's awesome to be here. Um, I've done a lot of these, and I think honestly the best way to go, if you guys are up for it, is I can talk to you for a couple of minutes here, but I think the best thing to do is to make this a little bit of a discussion and answer questions and listen to opinions and all of those things. That feels like it's the best. It's what gets the most reaction. So I don't know how you want to handle that, but if you guys want to raise your hand or whatever, and we can call on you and kind of go from there. Um, so let me give you just a real brief, a little brief sort of, I guess, synopsis of the book. It's going to be a little bit I'm a little bit rusty. I have spent the last 3, 4, 5 months hard writing my new book, which is called Why We Love Football, which actually here, I literally finished this yesterday. So this is it. I just came into the office to print it out. So I just finished that yesterday. So I'm very much I'm thinking a lot of about Red Grange and Tom Brady. So it's my mind is a little football-y, but I'm sure it'll come back fairly quickly. So why we love baseball? I wrote it. I'm sure some of you, maybe most of you, hopefully, read my last book, the Baseball 100, and coming off of the Baseball 100. I just got so many responses from people, so many cool emails and people coming up to me and all of that, uh, telling me why they love baseball. I mean, they talked about that book and what that book meant to them, which was so meaningful to me, and they talked about what it was they love about the game, and so why we love baseball. It's the first book that I've written where I had the title first. I even before I knew what the book was about, I knew that I was going to write a book called Why We Love Baseball, just based on the responses I was getting, and honestly, had a lot of different ideas about how that book was going to look or what that book was going to be, but I just knew it was going to sort of be about what it is that we love about this game. And it's very odd for me, I should say, very strange for me to write a book. I'm terrible at titles. They're always the last thing that come to me when I'm writing a book. No matter which book I've ever written, my first book is called The Soul of Baseball, a road trip to Buck O'Neill's America, and that book was originally called Baseball and Jazz, because that's what Buck always said were the two great things in the world is baseball and jazz. So that was what the book was going to be called. And the publishing house didn't like that title at all and told me to, let's come up with something better. And it took me months and months just to come up with something that's not really that hard. But I mean, I'm never good at this. Like I wrote a book called Paterno, and it took me forever to come up with that title. So I'm very bad at titles. So with this one, there was a clarity of what I wanted to get across. There was a clarity that I wanted this book to be what it is about this game that gets inside us and all of that. And when you're writing about baseball, now I have such a different perspective, having written the football book. Um, how different the sports are. I mean, I think it's a lot of it's obvious, a lot of it we know, a lot of it's in the George Carlin skit. But there's something about baseball and what if you ask somebody why they love football, there are any number of things that they can say, but it almost always will come down to it's the action of the sport and the violence, of course, and the excitement and the what it's like to be in a stadium of 80,000 people and on and on and on and on. But in baseball, when you ask somebody why that is they love baseball, they'll usually tell you about the first time they went to the stadium and the ballpark and walking up the stairs on and seeing the grass for the first time or holding holding their dad's hand as they walked in. And it's very personal. And that when you're writing a book called Why We Love Baseball, it's hard to write, the personal experiences of all the people that you want to read the book. So what I sort of came to feel about it was I wanted to write a book of moments. I wanted to write a book of the greatest, most exciting, most magical moments in baseball history, and so that's sort of what led to the idea of doing the book the way I did it, where I wrote about famous moments, not famous moments. You'll get the shot heard around the world and Fisk's home run and Aaron's home run and all of that, but you'll also get the story of Chelsea Baker and the story of Joe Bauman and a bunch of other things that people here might know about just because you guys are so because baseball is so much a part of you, but that most people wouldn't know anything at all about. So finding that mix was really cool. Each chapter was really fun to write, just because each one it felt like its own little adventure, and some of the ones that are more famous, I'm trying to find that hook that's something that somebody that they've never written before, which I think I was able to do for most of these. And then when you're writing about the stuff that people wouldn't know about, it's all open grass, right? It's just you just can kind of go. So that's sort of what it was. I can imagine what some of your questions probably will be, and happy to talk about those. But like I said, I would love to make this a discussion. So if you guys would like to ask some questions, let's plan on it that way. And I can see in the corner here who's raising their hands. So
Yeah.
it looks like Jeff, you were first. If you want to, let's get you started.
Thanks, Joe. And obviously, love the book. Love the book. You talked about moments that happened. How about the moment that may not have happened? The famous Jackie Robinson, Pee Wee Reese. Because when I read that, I was floored, and I actually spoke to Bob Kendrick about that, and it was just amazing. That just can't believe that may or may not happen. So, could you please talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's there are, and I knew there would be. I mean, just this is very different. Again, I'm not promise not to turn this thing into just a difference between the football and baseball books, but baseball, the story of Jackie Robinson, the story of race in baseball, the story of segregation in the early days in the Negro Leagues, and very different than football. Football is like this very odd history where in the early days, African American players did play. Some played. There were some Hall of Fame players, Duke Slater and others in the early days. Then they went when they tried to become more like baseball. In the 30s, they segregated, and then there was a sort of a several players. It wasn't a Jackie Robinson. It was several players in both the NFL and the AFC that ended up desegregating the game. So baseball, that story is obviously, to me, it's the seminal story of the game of baseball, and it's you talk about Jackie Robinson and what leads up to Jackie Robinson, all this, the whole story. Of course, I've been fascinated. I'm glad you have talked about Kendrick. I hope many of you or most of you have been to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. It's greatest place in the world. Bob's the greatest guy. If you ever do go, send me a note, and we'll get Bob there. I set Bob up all the time to do. You've seen if you've seen the museum, it's wonderful on your own. If you get to see it with Bob Kendrick, it's a life changing experience. Um, but one of the seminal stories, obviously, is this, as the story goes, as the story has been told through the years. They were in Cincinnati in Jackie Robinson's first year. It's the first time, sort of, not in the South, but South, and of course Cincinnati at that point was pretty far west for Major League Baseball as well. So it was a a different kind of experience than just being around New York and Boston and Philadelphia, even though obviously Jackie Robinson dealt with many issues in Philadelphia as well. But it was different, and the story goes that the crowd was really getting on not just Jackie Robinson, but getting on Pee Wee Reese, because Pee Wee Reese was from Louisville nearby, and they were getting on him for playing with a black player and so on. And the story goes that he walked across the diamond and put his arm around Jackie Robinson as a demonstration of his support for Jackie and sort of a defiance of the crowd. And the story's been told many, many, many times. There is a statue, as you guys know, there in Brooklyn, and but there's actually another statue. I believe there are two statues to the moment. It was a very, very big part of Ken Burns' baseball documentary when he first did it. And then, as I'm writing about it, I mean, I knew a lot of this, but as I'm writing about it, a lot of people started to really say it didn't happen. And one of the people who really came out very strongly that it didn't happen is Ken Burns himself, who became utterly convinced that if it had happened, the black press would have been all over it. There is no story about Jackie Robinson, about him putting his arm around him or talking to him or doing anything. Nothing in Cincinnati. The Cincinnati paper actually uh, says that the crowd was very supportive. Now, obviously, it was in the white Cincinnati paper, but I mean, they made a very direct line that the crowd was very supportive of Jackie Robinson. So so then it's a mystery. All right, did this happen? Did this not happen? And what I wrote is an exploration of that. First of all, why it matters, because like the clearly the truth of what happened and the truth of what Pee Wee Reese meant to Jackie Robinson and how supportive he was and what friends they became through the years and all of that, they're two different things. So it's there's a greater truth there, but it does matter. Did it happen? Did it happen the way it was told? And there, was able through various other people and through some research of my own. I believe it did happen. I believe a version of it happened. Now, is the story exactly the way that people told it? No, I don't think it is. I don't even know that it happened in Cincinnati necessarily. It might have happened somewhere else. But Jackie Robinson, to me, the most compelling evidence is about a year after his rookie season, he did an 8-part series where he talked about his life with the Brooklyn newspaper. And in there, he talked about specifically a moment. Now, the way he said it was not the crowd getting on Pee Wee Reese, it was the other team. I think he had it in Boston, I believe. But it was the other team that was getting on Pee Wee Reese. And that Pee Wee Reese then came over and put his hand on Jackie's shoulder and they didn't say anything. In the movie version of it, he gives this grand speech about, Jackie will beat them together kind of thing. And I don't believe that happened either. It's good in the movie, but it's not great in reality. Um, but and Jonathan Ive, who wrote a wonderful book about Jackie Robinson's first year, is less convinced than I am that it happened. But he also is of the belief that something happened, some form of this in some manner that at one point Pee Wee Reese, who very much admitted he grew up, he did not know any black people, he was not, he grew up in a very, very segregated world, that he came around to becoming one of Jackie's great champions and great friends, and that to me is at the heart of the story, I think. Okay, all right. Steve, looks like you got your hand up.
Yes, I do, Joe. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next month in Boca Raton live.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and I want to thank you for re energizing my love for baseball,
Thank you.
which with Baseball 100, why we love baseball, the stories, the anecdotes, the stats, the rabbit holes. Wonderful. Thank you. And I've got a great question. I think people will be interested. I'm not going to ask that one. I got to ask the one that's been bugging me since I was a kid. Maybe you know this. I've never gotten an answer. Why in 1968 could everyone pitch and no one hit? Why that year? How is that possible?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I'm going to give you an answer that's not going to be as fulfilling as it could be. But you know, you can see it building through the 60s, right? You can see it
Right.
like there wasn't a lot of hitting in 67, there wasn't a lot of hitting in 66, especially in the National League. You could see it building throughout the 60s. Um, what I think happened in 68 is sort of what happened here in the late 90s, where it was sort of the crescendo where you saw the home run thing building and building and building. Like, I think that there's a real tendency to say, oh, all the home runs and everything came about because of steroids and that was it, as if one day every single person decided that they were going to start popping steroids, and that's, but if you watch it, you see really starting even in 93, even before the strike, and then certainly in 94 and 95 and 96, lots and lots of things were pointing to the direction of power in those days. The ballparks were getting smaller. The strike zone was not being called. The baseballs were probably lighter, or juicier, or whatever you want to say. So, and it slowly started building. Sort of the same thing. The mound um, was lowered after 68. It was not that the mound was raised throughout the 60s. It was just that they stopped caring. I mean, the rule was always the rule. There always needed to be like a limit. Um, but people just stopped, you know, sort of in the same way as steroids, honestly, where it's sort of like, well, there was sort of a rule in place, but there was nobody enforcing that rule. So the mound kept getting taller. The strike zone was crazy in the mid to late 60s. Um, Top of the shoulder was a strike. I mean, it was the strike zone. They changed it. I mean, a lot of people know and remember that they changed the mound after 68, but they also changed the strike zone. They brought the strike zone down a little bit. And the crazy thing is, even after that, it's not like offense came rushing back. It really didn't. The early 70s are a dead period for hitting, to the point where it led to the DH. I mean, it was, especially in the American League, people just totally stopped hitting, and it was completely and utterly devoid of. I mean, it was just dominant pitching. And think about it now, it was dominant pitching in a way that is completely foreign to the game now, right? Because it's one pitcher. It's one guy throwing 9 innings again and again and again and again. And now we look back on all the 300 game winners from that time, and the dominant pitchers of that time, and Gibson and Koufax and Marichal and so on and so on and so on. And these guys were all pitching 350 innings a year, 320 innings a year, and they still couldn't hit them. It's really quite wild. So I don't think that I have a great answer for why 68 happened to be the magical year. But what I do think is you can see the trend lines going up and up and up. And the way baseball works, to me, I think a lot about how in this year, and maybe one of you will want to talk about this, they changed the rules to make the game quicker. And if you look over the last 30 years of the game, there's no one thing that led to 3 hour games, 3 hour 10-minute games, 3 hour 20-minute games, 4 hour games, and so on. It was just one thing after another, after another, after another. But eventually there was a crescendo. And there was a 3 hour, I think 3 hours and 8 minutes, 3 hours and 9 minutes was the average, 45 minutes slower than it had been in the 80s. I mean, just that much. And so I think that's the way baseball works. One thing piles on another, piles on another, piles on another. They don't enforce, they don't follow the rules as closely, and next thing you know, you have a crazy year of the pitcher. And I think that's probably what the way to explain it.
All right, thank you. I'll get back in line for my really good question.
Great. Great. All right. David, how are you? No,
Hi.
yeah. Hey.
Hi. Hi. My question is actually regarding why we love baseball, why we love baseball in spite of itself. It seems to be very sort of self-destructive. The powers that be are chasing the almighty dollar, and we know it's dollar driven, whether it's TV ratings or eyeballs on streaming services and things of that nature. Um, and we as consumers, the fans are always going to be there for the game in spite of what the owners and the powers that be are doing to the game. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What you're saying is 100% true. And as you've hinted, I mean, it's been that way. It's always been that way. The owners have always been, pretty much out for themselves, and that only continues. I think the hardest part of being a fan in a lot of ways is that you are so reliant on things beyond your power. You know what I mean? It fascinates me that in England that when you deal with the soccer teams that they have these boards of fans that have actual real say in how the club is run and how the team is built and the sort of operating philosophy of the team. And if you're a fan of the Cincinnati Reds, you have no say whatsoever in how the Reds are run, and you're sort of a powerless, and I think that's sort of what it is to be a fan of baseball, particularly. I mean, that's true in most sports or even all sports in America, but it's particularly true in baseball because the season is so long and there are so many games, and there's this wild baseball has become, and I know we'll talk about this as we go forward. Baseball has become this very, very odd sort of uh, it's an odd mix because on the one hand you have the longest season, which baseball fans have always taken great pride in, and on the other hand, you have probably the most random playoff system in sports. I mean, it's really, really wild that you're a Baltimore Orioles fan. Last year, you finally have your moment. They win 100 games. They play terrific. They beat expectations and beat the timing. And then, what? 3 games into the postseason, you're done. It's over. And not only is it over, but suddenly it's like, well, was that a good season? I don't even know if that was a good season. I mean, everything just died like right away. And so that's very, very strange. And I don't think baseball fans had any say in any of that. So I think that part is hard. It's hard to be a baseball fan in that way, and it is difficult to see the game run by greed. It is difficult to see the game, but it's also sort of always been true, and I think that the way you respond to that is, it's how difficult was it to be a fan of almost any American League team in the 1950s when the Yankees were literally winning every single year? I mean, if you were a fan of Cleveland, maybe, would get, at least a little contention, might win in 54, maybe. Uh, your White Sox, maybe you'd win once or twice. But basically, every other team, you have no chance, none for a decade, more than a decade, 20 years, 25 years, absolutely nothing. And that's really frustrating. And so I think the frustrations of being a fan are very, very real, and they're very much a part of it. And look, the other thing that I think you're saying, which I think is 100% right, and maybe a little bit separate from that, is it's been hard to watch the way they've run the game. It's been very difficult to watch the way the game has been run for a very long time. I did think last year with the rule changes was sort of a first nod to like, hey, let's make this game interesting for fans again. Let's try to make this game more fun for fans after all this time. Um, but that's after 30 or 40 years of not seeming to care at all in a lot of ways. So it is difficult for sure. All right. Jeffrey, I guess you're next.
Hi, Joe. It's good to see you here. I've always enjoyed your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
This week I saw a film called The Holdovers, and it stars Paul Giamatti. After really liking his father's Bart Giamatti, and in fact, in the first scene of the film, there's a shot of Paul reading or his character reading Fear Strikes Out. So that's a nice little baseball nod. So I was thinking about Bart Giamatti and his very very brief time as commissioner. I admired him greatly, and he died like 10 days after the Pete Rose decision. Also very sad. So, and that to segue your last response, I was just thinking about how baseball might have been different if Giamatti had lived. There was Fay Vincent for a brief time as commissioner, and then for a long time, Bud Selig. So I wanted to ask you that question. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. I saw the movie too. I saw Holdovers as well. I really enjoyed it. There are two things I would say about Bart Giamatti, and first is not exactly related to what you're saying, but is related a little bit to the book, and then the other thing would be more directly about what the game might have looked like had Bart Giamatti lived. The first thing that I would say is that I think people very much have misunderstood this, and I misunderstood it for a long time. The last thing in the world that Bart Giamatti wanted to do was suspend Pete Rose. He so badly wanted Pete Rose to just admit he gambled on baseball. Everybody knew it was true. He knew it was true. He had the evidence that it was true. It wasn't the best run investigation ever. There were some sort of unseemly qualities to the way the investigation was run. Nothing to do with Bart Giamatti. But regardless, he knew, and everybody knew, that Pete Rose had bet on baseball and had bet on the Reds when he was manager. He didn't want to suspend him for life. Even knowing that's the rule. If you bet on your own team, you are permanently banned. Even knowing that, he pleaded with Rose, just admit you bet on baseball, suspend you for 1 year, you come back, you'll be in the game, you'll be in the Hall of Fame. And Pete Rose wouldn't do it, would not do it, refused, of course, then sued and did all sorts of other very, very sort of rotten things. And he left Bart Giamatti with no choice. And it was very, very hard on Bart Giamatti. I'm not someone who can say that it contributed to his early death. But it didn't help. I mean, he was under tremendous, tremendous strain. And part of the reason he was under such tremendous strain is he loved the game so much. And the last thing in the world he wanted, he admired Pete Rose as a player and just felt like, and by the way, believed that Pete Rose would go to the Hall of Fame even after this suspension. He thought that he would be elected to the Hall of Fame. But it's really striking, I think, and I think it speaks to who Bart Giamatti was and how pure his love of baseball was, that despite Pete Rose attacking him on every level, personal level, professional level, everything else, he he just knew what was best for the game, and what he believed was best for the game was for Pete Rose to just admit he bet on baseball, take a year to sort of find himself. And it's not that he was under any illusions that Pete Rose was going to change in that 1 year, but it would put the scandal behind him. Pete Rose would know, hey, if you get caught gambling on baseball again, this is it. And life would go on, and he'd be in the Hall of Fame, and the game would be able to celebrate him for the player that he was. And, you know, I don't think Pete Rose is the kind of person that looks back. I don't think he's the kind of person who regrets. But if he was offered that deal today, he'd taken it once. He's already tried to take every other, because he's now admitted he bet on baseball. He admitted he bet on the Reds. He's admitted this and that and the other, and of course numerous other sort of unseemly things have come out about him. And now he's never ever going to the Hall of Fame. That's never happening. And it was just a real shame that the way that Bart Giamatti handled that was so graceful and so classy, and he's taken a beating through the years for it from Pete Rose fans who became convinced that there was some sort of witch hunt, which it was the exact opposite of that. So that's the first thing I want to say about Bart Giamatti. He was a very look. Bud Selig Bud and I have knocked heads on many things through the years. Bud Selig loves baseball. I'm not going to be able to tell you with 100% certainty the guy who is commissioner of baseball right now loves baseball. But I can tell you Bud Selig loved the game. But his love of the game was very different from Bart Giamatti's love of the game. Bart Giamatti, even though Bud Selig fashions himself a historian and so on, his sense of history of the game is a little bit skewed. And Bart Giamatti was this grand historian of the game, this grand believer in keeping the game, on this. He had very high ideals for the game. He was a man of high ideals, obviously, as a university president as well. I mean, he was a man of high ideals. So how the game would have changed, I think that the strike is the big question, how he would have been able to handle that scenario. I think Bud Selig was probably much more he wanted to break the union. I mean, frankly, and I don't think Bart Giamatti would have gone in that direction. I think Bart Giamatti would have stood up to the owners more. He wasn't one of them, so he would have stood up to the owners more. So there is a reasonable chance that the strike and the canceling of the World Series and sort of this break in the timeline of baseball would not have happened had Bart Giamatti been and I think some of the other things that we've seen through the years, the getting rid of adding interleague play, adding the wild card, getting rid of essentially breaking apart the whole idea of an American League and a National League and making it all one big thing. I think Bart Giamatti would have fought against a lot of those things, just because I think he was much more of a traditional. Now, how that would have played over an extended period of time, I don't know. But I do think it would have been a very different road for the game had he stayed. Now, there's another element of this, which is, and I see Steve wrote this on the comments, and it's true. The owners probably would not have put up with him at some point. Now, Fay Vincent, who they did fire, was not nearly as admired as Bart Giamatti. He was a little bit more sort of defiant than Bart Giamatti was. I don't know how Bart Giamatti would have been able to deal with an ownership group that was growing more and more belligerent and all of that, particularly toward the players. I don't know what would have happened there. He might just have gotten fired and everything would have stayed exactly the same as history. But I'd like to believe that he was a man who had great. He not only had great ideals, he also was a man who knew how to make things work, and I think that he might have found a way. So that's sort of my best bet, my best guess there. Great. All right, David.
Hi, Joe. I think that was fantastic. It was. I loved the book. I just wanted, before I say what my question is, I think my brother pointed this out to me once, and I think he's right that Bud Selig ran the game to destroy Paul Molitor, because everything he did was to he moved the Brewers to the National League so that Molitor could not play every day. Molitor was a leader of the union. And I think I think he had it in personally for the guy. My question is, as a writer, I found Baseball's 100 absolutely fascinating, the way you sort of did various different aspects of these players' careers from 100 to 1. And it's only late in the book you realize that your ranking of them is not as much a ranking, but using carefully chosen numerals. Like 56 is DiMaggio, Psalm 91 is Mariano Rivera. I'm curious about the process by which you wrote the book, made the choices about what you were going to write about with these folks, and how you did the numerical ranking.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll start with the ranking first and then kind of build from there. So, I had been working for years on this idea of ranking the 100 greatest players. I mean, it's not a new idea. And it's been
Oh,
done.
Larry Ritter, who I'm sure you know, once
Sure.
told me, if you were going to make a list of the 100 best ball players of all time, everybody would agree in the first 75 and beat the heck out of each other for the last 25.
That sounds about right. That sounds about right. I have found that people will beat the heck out of me on the first 75 too, but that's okay. Um, I knew what I wanted, which was I wanted this, to be much larger than the sum of its parts. I wanted it to be a book about the history of the game that much more than I wanted it to be a was, you know, was Bob Gibson better than Tom Seaver or whatever the case may be. I didn't want it to be that kind of ranking where it was sort of like I every ranking is so perfectly placed that I want it to focus on okay, so wait, so you've got Joe Morgan had a Frank Robinson or Frank Robinson of Joe, I didn't want that. So I thought, well, these numbers have to represent something larger to me than just the ranking. I mean, the rankings are there. I mean, I did a very detailed statistical um, thing, and then broke that down into many other pieces, and so came up with a list. I mean, I have a list at home of the way I did it of the 1,000 greatest players in baseball history in numerical order. My list is very different than that one. The players are more or less the same, but the numbers are very different because I wanted the numbers to be representative of something. It's almost like I wanted each player to have somehow earned that specific number. So Tom Seaver's at 41. Is Tom Seaver the 41st greatest player ever? I don't think so. He's higher than that probably. But 41 is his number. So I wanted that to be there, and so I did that, and there was 2 points to that. One was I think there's something very sort of poetic about seeing somebody with the number that we associate them with. And then secondly, I wanted people to know this wasn't that serious, that I wasn't being like literal in every single thing. I mean, when you get to the top 10, I'm more literal, and I do a little bit more sort of, I wouldn't say explaining, but like if you're going to put Willie Mays number one, you should tell people why you're putting Willie Mays number one. So that's sort of how I viewed it. The each individual player and essay was much like Why We Love Baseball. Each one was its own adventure, which I really loved, and it's the same way I just did the football book. Each moment, each player was its own thing, and some players, when you're writing about them, if you're writing about Archie Vaughan, nobody, maybe, again, maybe amongst this company it's different, but generally nobody even knows who Archie Vaughan is. Nobody's ever heard of Archie Vaughan. And so I'm free to write about anything I want when I write about Archie Vaughan, because it's like, but if I'm writing about Stan Musial, or I'm writing about Babe Ruth, or I'm writing about Tom Seaver, or I'm writing about Albert Pujols, well, there have been 12,000 things written about them in the last, 5 years. So I needed to find something different, a hook, a different form, a different way to write about each player. And I always people have asked me what's my favorite one in the book, and I don't have a specific favorite, but I will say that the one that sort of lit my path to the book was the one I did on Carlton Fisk. When I wrote about Carlton Fisk and really dug into his relationship with his father, how his sort of tough guy persona, um, I found the book in that chapter, because I'm like, okay, well, this is its own thing. It's like, okay, people, I can tell people how good a player Carlton Fisk was, and that's fine. And we can relive the home run. That's fine. We can relive his rivalries. That's fine. But I was really struck by the the way that he broke down at his Hall of Fame speech to talk about his father, and basically say, there's that famous story about Carlton Fisk's father walking through the Red Sox clubhouse, and somebody coming up to him, Carl Yastrzemski maybe, and saying, "Oh, Mr. Fisk, your son, it's great. So are you Carlton Fisk's father?" And he said, "No, Carlton Fisk is my son," which, very, very direct. And in the Hall of Fame speech, Carlton Fisk looked at his father with tears in his eyes and goes, "Well, I hope today, of all days, you can, for one day, you're Carlton Fisk's father." There was this very touching moment that I think spoke to some of the pain between them, some of the rivalry between them, but also this overpowering love between them. And once I knew that, I was, oh, that's what this book is. That's each of these players represents something even larger than themselves. They represent a part of what it is we why it is that we're so drawn to the game, what it is about this game that is carried through over 100 and 30 years, or 50 years, or 60 years, or whatever it is now. Um, that's when I really found the book, and so that to me was sort of a turning point, I guess.
Well,
Great.
I would like to see the 50 honorable mentions, the guys who fell just short of the 150.
Yeah, I did do a 10 who missed on my newsletter, which, by the way, if any of you want to join, that's great. It's just at joeposnanski.com. And I did do a 10 who missed there, where I did special um, baseball 100 style essays on, I think, 11 players that ended up being, because I had the fans vote, I had my readers vote on which players they wanted to see. I listed off, you know, 25 people that missed or something, and said, which of these do you want to see? And they picked 10, but they specifically did not pick Zach Greinke, because they knew I would write about Zach Greinke anyway. So they did it to get a little 11th bonus. So I think there are 11 on there now, under the 10 who missed banner, which was a lot of fun. Okay, is it Day?
Just
Yeah,
signed up for
yes,
you.
yes, that's Day.
Oh, great, thank you.
Well, hi, Joe. Actually, I wanted to show you this book, which,
Oh, there we go. There we go. I'm going to
um,
be in Cincinnati in a few weeks, actually.
yeah, and the reason why I love baseball was because of the Big Red Machine, and part of the reason I actually teach college courses now in baseball analytics.
Awesome.
So I guess my question is, going back to the Big Red Machine, do you have any, or can you share any stories that might have been like less known in terms of I guess what's been written, and yeah, and that's all I really want to hear.
Oh yeah,
Thanks.
no, no. Well, I'll tell you one story. It's not less known. It's not specific about the team, and then I'll tell you another really cool experience I had with this. So, by the way, I just so everybody would know, uh, I'm going to be in Cincinnati in now I think March 24th, so maybe 5, 6 weeks, because I won the Casey Award for Best Baseball Book for Why We Love Baseball. And which is super. I'm not saying that just to brag or anything. I'm saying that because the Casey Award is really something very special. It's a very privately run book event, book contest that Mike Shannon, not the baseball Mike Shannon, but Cincinnati Mike Shannon, has been running. He runs Spitball magazine and has been running the Casey Award since '83, and he's keeping it alive just through his own dedication. And it's such a cool thing. And they have this really funky event in a little bar in a strip mall, where everybody comes in, and it's just a whole bunch of baseball fans talking baseball in the middle of spring training, and it's really really fun and special. And I don't know if any of you will be anywhere near the Cincinnati area, but it's worth doing. Obviously, this year I'll be there, but it's worth every year. It's the really really fun, silly, wonderful little event. So let me tell you one little quick story about that book that I love to share, and then I'll see. I'll mention something else about that Big Red Machine. When when the book came out, so the book came out in 2009, I think. I went to Cincinnati. I was living in Kansas City at the time, and I drove. I don't remember why I drove. I think I had to stop in St. Louis, maybe, and maybe Indianapolis. I think I was doing like a little book tour, so I drove. And I drove from Cincinnati, from Kansas City to Cincinnati, and did an event there. And then I was driving back, and the book had just come out. I mean, it was in the first couple of weeks of the book coming out. And I was driving from Cincinnati back to Indianapolis. I was going to do an event in Indianapolis. And I was driving, and a police officer pulled me over on my way to Indianapolis. And uh, and of course, I'm just the last thing I want. And the police car officer comes over, and he does not seem, I mean, I've been pulled over that many times, but I've been pulled over a couple of times. So you sort of get a feel for, hey, is this guy going to let me off or not? And it was very clear from the way he responded, he was not going to let me off. And I'm like, oh, just going to have to pay this ticket and whatever. And I give him the license registration. And in my passenger seat of my car, I had a stack of Why We Love the Machines, the books, the machines. I had a little stack of them. So he comes over and he looks at my license and registration, and he's like, all right, hold on a minute. And then he stops and he goes, hey, what's that over there? And I said, oh, that's my book. I was doing in Cincinnati doing a book event, and that's the copies of my book. And he went, oh, what's the book about? And I said, oh, it's about the 1975 Cincinnati Reds, the Big Red Machine. And in 1 second, just instantly, he goes, Johnny Bench, Pete Rose, Dave Concepcion, Joe Morgan, Tony Perez, George Foster, Cesar Geronimo, and Ken Griffey. Literally names off the great eight in like 1 second. And I said, oh, yeah, they're all in there. And he let me off. I gave him a book. He let me off first, so I didn't bribe him to get the thing, but he let me off first. Then I signed a book for him. So anyway, the as an author, you don't make you hopefully as you grow, a little bit more popular, you start making money in writing. But I think some of you have written books, especially in those early days, you're not making a lot of money. So that was actually a pretty big, like, was it worth the trip? Yeah, I saved that ticket. That whatever it was $100. That was a pretty big deal, even then. The whole that whole experience was so fun. Going back and really, going day by day. The way I write books is I try to live inside the book as best I can. So in order to write about that book, all I did was listen to 1975 music. That's all I ever listened to. So like, sort of the early days of disco and sort of a little bit of the classic rock, but it was all 1975 music. I was trying to sort of get into that whole experience of what it was like in 1975. And so I'm basically I'm looking here. Thank you, Victor, for saying that I did bribe the police officer. I guess maybe I did. Maybe I didn't give him. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I didn't give him a book, just since we have a former prosecutor here. So anyway, but it was so fun to kind of go back. And then, of course, I talked to all of those players and, had different experiences with them. Actually had some of my best experiences were with Pete Rose. He's an unbelievable storyteller and has incredible memory and is great when it comes to that kind of thing. But one of the cool things that I did as part of this was they had a little grade 8 dinner in Cincinnati that cost a bunch of money to go. And I think it was I'm trying to remember. It was in this art gallery, and I remember it was the biggest book expense I had was I bought a ticket to go because I didn't feel comfortable asking to do it as a writer. So I bought a ticket to go. And I know it was pretty pricey because I was sitting next to Nick Lachey, the singer. He's a big Reds fan, you probably know. But all of them were there. And watching them interact with each other at that point was really, it was so great for the book, but it was so funny. It's like everything was sort of the same, I mean, it's like there was still these power struggles for who was sort of the top person there, and everybody loved Tony Perez as big dog, and everybody was making fun of Joe Morgan, and Joe Morgan was just biting back at everybody, and nobody thought, everybody treated Dave Concepcion like he was just sort of a little kid brother. And I mean, it was really, really funny to see how all of those guys they were still the Big Red Machine, even after all those years, they were still kind of the same. And it was really cool. It was really fun. So hope that gives you a little something anyway. Awesome. Okay, Steve.
All right. Joe, it's so upsetting. I know it is to you too, how many great black ball players we missed out on in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And as you pointed out in your book, we know how great they must have been because of how they dominated in the 50s and 60s.
Exactly.
But my question on the Negro Leagues is this. We know they were great ball players, but how bad were the bad players? I mean, was Satchel Paige striking out guys that were holding the bat at the wrong end? Was Josh Gibson hitting 70-mile-an-hour fastballs? I mean, how bad were the worst?
It's a good question. It's a good question about how what the gap was between the very best players and the not great players. Here's one thing to think about though. The rosters on these teams were very, very small. I mean, a lot of players, almost all players, I mean, really pitched and hit. I mean, there was very much, and they played all the positions. You had to be on the level of an Oscar Charleston or on the level of a Turkey Stearns or something like that, a Willie Wells, to have sort of one position. Otherwise, it was like, we'll play you wherever we play you. I mean, it was very much they would so I think that look, if right now half the players in Major League Baseball were banned, essentially. If basically we said, all right, we're gonna do the Thanos thing and we're gonna cut off half of society and half of the baseball players are gone. I think the quality of game would go down, but you would not have bad players in baseball. There are more than enough players in AAA and AA and players who gave up on the game because they realized that they were not going to be able to make the major leagues to more than make up. If you got rid of every Major League Baseball player, every single one, you would still have a very high level game. It wouldn't be nearly as high. The stars would just be different, but it would be a very high level game because it would still be the best game we could see. And I think that what you're probably seeing is, there were probably in Satchel Paige's time, there were probably, I think there are 5 or 6 pitchers who are in the Hall of Fame. Hilton Smith is in the Hall of Fame, and I'm going to come up with the names: Smokey Joe Williams and Leon Day and some others are in the Hall of Fame. I think those players were all major league caliber players, and they were all like probably could have starred at least for a time in the major leagues. Then I think there was probably a next level that was like, are they AAA type players, AA type players? Yeah, maybe so. I don't think because the roster sizes were so small and because the pitchers pitch so much, I don't think you're going to have really, really like bad players. Now, you start getting into the 50s and 60s. Well, 60, the game, it really ends in 60. So you're talking about particularly the late 50s, 54 to 60. Yeah, the quality of the game was quite low at that point. I mean, it was, they were trying a lot of gimmicks to try to keep the game going, and there was just it was over because essentially every single person uh, who wanted to play in Major League Baseball was at least given the opportunity to play in the minor leagues. I mean, the getting into the major leagues took a very long time, especially in places like Philadelphia and Boston. But the minor leagues at that point started getting to be filled. So I think the quality was probably at the low end was probably not that great, but I don't know that it was significantly worse than the low end of Major League Baseball at that time either. The one that interests me is how often did Babe Ruth face a good pitcher? That's what interests me even more. Not to say that it doesn't interest me on the Negro League side too, but there was Walter Johnson and Walter Johnson was so much better than everybody else in the American League that that he stood out on a whole other level. And then Lefty Grove, same thing. And then you had a bunch of like, okay, a lot of good pitchers, and then probably some pretty shaky pitchers that guys could beat up on a little bit. So yeah, I think it is fascinating. I would love to see a study done of the low end of all of these leagues and just to see what the quality was at the bottom end. So great question.
Jim Neighbors and Ed Sheehan and Howard Emke, for example.
Absolutely. Okay, David.
Hi, good morning, Joe. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. We know you're a very busy guy. When I read Why We Love Baseball, there was sort of a neat symmetry right from the opening pages, because in the preface or the introduction, you had told a story about Dwight Evans and Stratomatic, I believe. And I had that hit home with me because baseball simulations were among the reasons that I first loved baseball, and compiling numbers and things and playing Sports Illustrated baseball in the summer of 1972. I had Ed Herman hit a walk-off home run for the 1971 White Sox on an obscure role. And that was against my nemesis down the street, Drew Hoyle, who I'm sure to this day still hates Ed Herman because I didn't let him forget it. But I have a two-part question for you, and that is it either as a hobby or when you do some of the comparisons in your Substack columns, do you use any sort of simulations, whether it's for players or teams, number one? And then number two, in your travels and collecting other people's stories about your book, has anybody else connected with the Dwight Evans story?
Yeah, great questions. On the simulation side, probably to what you're referring to, I have not done very much. However, I have a very good relationship with Stratomatic. And so Stratomatic actually does quite a few simulations for me and my at my Substack. Last year, either last year or 2 years ago, I can't even keep up. I did a battle of the states where I picked the best players from I think 8 states. I think we did it as an 8 team tournament. So the best players from California, the best players from Alabama, the best players. So I mean, like I remember the Alabama team was really loaded because they had Hank Aaron and Willie Mays and Satchel Paige pitching and all of that. And all I did was pick like a starting team. I didn't maybe I might have had a little bit of a righty lefty sort of like I might have had a couple of bench players, but not many. And I think I only had one pitcher. And I just wrote it just kind of as a fun thing. And then Stratomatic reached out to me and said, hey, we'll run these simulations. So we ran an actual tournament between all of the, things that had readers predict who was going to win these series. And it was really a lot of fun. And we ran the box scores. I mean, it was really, really pretty fun. So I do stuff like that quite a bit. Stratomatic has been amazing. And I love Stratomatic. And to speaking of your point, my friend Jim Banks. So I've actually had a real sort of, I think as an author, for me as an author, like the most important thing for me is honesty. I mean, there's a connection to the reader that I think about all the time. And I feel like there needs to be an honest, I want to be as honest as I can about who I am, what I'm representing, what I'm writing about. So in that book, I wrote about beating my friend Jim Banks in a World Series Stratomatic with Dwight Evans. Like he had me up down 3-1, I believe, in the series, and then was beating me 1-0 in the ninth, and I think it was I can't even remember who the Reds pitcher was that was throwing, but he was throwing like he might have even had a no hitter going for a good time. But then in the ninth inning, he walked a guy maybe, or Marty Berra got a hit or something, and then he faced Dwight Evans, and he had to make the choice whether to pull his lefty starter or bring in like Rob Dibble to close out the game. And he painfully decided to stay with the starter, and Dwight Evans hit the home run, and I won the game, and I won the series. And so I write about this, and basically say in the book, um, I'm just very, very happy that for all eternity, I'll have this on the record that I beat my friend Jim Banks in this game with Dwight Evans hitting the home run. So, but again, it's about honesty. So I'm writing this football book, and Jim sends me a note saying, now you need to remember in Stratomatic football, I beat you in the heartbreaking game where he had Dan Fouts complete a touchdown pass into triple coverage and beat me as a coach. And he's like, you have to put that in there. And I have to decide as an author whether the honesty that this demands of me is more important than always having this upper hand on my friend Jim Banks. So I'm still debating what to do. I've got a version of it right now where he's in, but it's not the final. I'm sending it in Monday, so I'm going to take the weekend to decide whether or not I'm actually going to include that in there. On your second question, yes, lots and lots and lots of people have come up to me, and I've been surprised. And you mentioned this too about Sports Illustrated Baseball, APBA, the others. I've been surprised how many people have come up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, I did the same thing, but it wasn't Stratomatic for me. It was something else. It was another."
That throw is what I play.
Right. So, it was very much but people have just come up to me constantly. And for a while there, at my very first events, my first 10 events or something, Stratomatic gave away a game. So there was a real opportunity to talk about Stratomatic and what it means and how important it is for why we love baseball, not only Stratomatic, but all of those kinds of games, inventing our own games. I mean, baseball is such a mathematical sport. Again, very, very different from football, where nobody cares about the numbers. Nobody cares. I mean, I just wrote, well, I didn't just write, but I mean, I wrote a chapter in there about Emmett Smith. Emmett Smith has the rushing record that will never, ever be broken. Nobody's ever going to break that record. And Nobody knows that number. No single person knows that number. It would be like The Price is Right. Like I'm not 100% sure how many people would even know what the first two numbers are in it. Like I don't, like if it was like the price of a car, you'd be like, is the first number two? Like, no, I mean, like nobody would even know, like they wouldn't even know where to begin on what the actual number is. And obviously that's would never happen in baseball. I mean, everybody knows that how long Cal Ripken's streak was, or how many hits Pete Rose had, or whatever the case may be. So I think that's such a part of the game that these simulation, not just games, but lots and lots of people. I wish I knew more about simulation, like software and how to use it, because the stuff that people can do, obviously what they do with running a million pennant races and just to determine what your percentage chances are and whatever. I mean, like, I wish I could do a lot of that stuff because it's incredibly cool and such a fun and unique part of baseball, I think, for me. Okay, Damian.
Okay, Joe, why don't we give you like 60 to 90 seconds just to take a little bit of a breather? Yeah, gonna do some business here.
Please, yes.
For the KC Stengel members, if you want to hang on after Joe leaves, we have some business we can talk about. But if you don't want to stay on, that's okay, because we'll probably go over this next month when we have the in-person meeting. Okay, so that's just a bit. So Kevin, if you go on the chapter website and bring up some pages, we could do that after Joe leaves. Joe, I'm in New York City, but I'm flying to Charlotte Tuesday night to see you. And okay, so I don't really have a question, but Floyd Lapp has been waiting since I think 3 minutes after we began. So yes, I'm gonna let
that's Floyd... actually what I that's why I raised my hand.
Yeah,
I wanted to point out that Floyd's been going like this.
Yeah.
Since we started, right? So
great,
Floyd,
great stuff, Joe.
Yeah, you've got the question for Joe.
Thank you very much, and Joe, the enthusiasm is less my raising my hand, but for the two books, the 100 and the Moments, that I had the pleasure of reading since November. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. With regard to the top 100, and I realize it's a leap of faith to compare that list with why isn't A-Rod, why isn't Bonds, et cetera, in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I also have been to Cooperstown, as everybody on this call has been, and we see they're represented in the the exhibits, but the plaque gallery, the hall, the solemn territory. And I know about ethics clauses, and I also knew about them going way back with Leo DeRocha and Ty Cobb, who were in the Hall of Fame. There are those who say it'll take a long, long time to get over the era of PEDs, and there's nothing now, especially with the commissioner that we have, and I kind of heard what you said earlier about him, and I appreciate that, if I'm reading you right. Is there no hope at all for these people who climb a little bit and then fall, and maybe the Veterans Committee is a backdoor, which I'm against? They deserve to be entering right in the front with all sorts of applause. What's your take on those people?
Well, it's a big question. Thank you for that. And it's
a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question because I mean it's something I've written, many times about, and have strong opinions about it, but also have a complete understanding for how different people feel about it. So I'm a voter. I am a Hall of Fame voter, and I always voted for every one of those guys. I voted for Bonds. I voted for Clemens. I voted for McGuire. I didn't vote for Sosa, but that's more because of him as a player. I mean, there were specific reasons. But I voted for those guys. I mean, it's not that I didn't take it into account. I did. I do. And I think a lot of people have feel the way I feel, which is it's not that those aren't a part of their story. Of course they are. And I think you have to take into account, especially more recent. I mean, it's one thing to talk about Bonds and Clemens. It's another thing to talk about A-Rod and Manny Ramirez and guys like that who actually failed tests, who actually got suspended, and so on. But again, I wish more people would use that as rather than okay, this utterly um, this utterly eliminates them from consideration. I wish they would have a more nuanced view and say, okay, this is a mark. Sort of, I think of Andre Dawson. Andre Dawson was an incredible player. Andre Dawson had a very low on base percentage for his career. He didn't walk. He just did not walk. So when Andre Dawson's career was over, and you were talking about him in the Hall of Fame, you have to take that into consideration. It's not fair to think of the greatest players ever and not say, well, you know what? That would be a really historically, that would be a very, very, very low on base percentage to put him into the Hall of Fame. Same thing with Jack Morris. That'd be a very, very high ERA for anybody. It would be the highest ERA in the Hall of Fame. Uh, Dawson's on base percentage wouldn't have been the lowest, but it would have been the lowest for anybody who was getting into the Hall of Fame essentially for his hitting, for his offensive prowess. I mean, he was a great defender in his younger days before the knees went out, but he's not getting in the Hall of Fame for his defense. He's getting in the Hall of Fame because he was the Hawk and he was this incredible force offensively. So you take that into consideration and you go, all right, he does have a low on base percentage, but he has a high slugging percentage, or he hit with a lot of power. He had a lot of great moments. He did a lot of great things, and I think you take all of it into consideration. And I wish more people would do that with these guys, where you'd say, okay, look, what Barry Bonds did is a knock on him. To me, does that outweigh the fact that he was the greatest player of his time, one of the greatest players who ever lived, the fact that he won 1,000,000 Gold Gloves and hit 700 home runs and stole 500 bases and this and this and this and this? Does that take away from all of that? Maybe. Does that eliminate all of that? It doesn't for me. So that's how I've tried to view it. What's very interesting about those guys, specifically Bonds and Clemens, because A-Rod and Manny Ramirez and those other guys they're different because they did get suspended. When I think about Bonds and Clemens, the majority of people want them in the Hall of Fame. It's
Right.
they both got, I think, 65, maybe almost two-thirds of the vote. That's not enough. You need 75%. So the question is, when you have a vast majority that believe that those guys should be in the Hall of Fame, but you have 30% that are so adamant they don't belong in the Hall of Fame, then what do you do at that point? And I think what it actually happens is you have a standoff, which is what we're having right now. And here's the big issue for those guys. The writers have a pretty, even 65% or whatever it was that at the end of the day voted for them. That's a much higher percentage than the players have. The retired players, the players in the Hall of Fame, they don't want them in. They don't want them in. Joe Morgan sent out a letter to all of us saying, I don't want these guys in. They shouldn't be in. We all feel this way. I think probably most of them do feel that way. So there's not really another outlet for them to get into the Hall of Fame. There's not. They're not going to get voted in by a committee. They're just not. And so when you sort of put that together, you go, well, what's going to happen here? I mean, are we really just going to go on indefinitely without some of the greatest players in the history of the game not in the Hall of Fame? And I've been asking this question for years, And right now it looks like it's just going to be in limbo for a long, long time. And you know, I've written about this a lot lately, and it's hard for me to write this or talk about this without sounding like I'm demeaning somebody, and I'm not meaning to demean anybody. But when you look at baseball for the last 30 years, and you look at who the dominant figures were, you look at who altered the game, changed the game, focused all of our attention. You got Barry Bonds, you got Roger Clemens, you got Sammy Sosa, you got Curt Schilling. These people were the dominant forces of the game. They were at, I mean, along with some who are in the Hall of Fame, Derek Jeter, Greg Maddux, Pedro, Randy Johnson, those guys, Chipper Jones. But lately we've been putting in Scott Rowland and Todd Helton. And I mean, I voted for those guys. I mean nothing against those guys. But when you're putting in Todd Helton and Scott Rowland and not putting in Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, what is the Hall of Fame? What is the Hall of Fame? And I think that's something that is a real challenge. And I have actually talked. I saw that here on SABR Day that Josh Raywich, who's one of my favorite people in the world, president of the Hall of Fame, is doing one of these SABR days. I don't know where, but somewhere. Oh, maybe in Cooperstown. And Josh and I have talked about this, and I've told him, I said, your challenge is going to be, it's an existential challenge, which is you are going to have to guide the Hall of Fame into determining what it is. And maybe you can go on indefinitely with keep putting in, you know, guys who were very, 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 very good players, Billy Wagner and Todd Helton and Scott Rowland and these guys. Maybe you can keep going like that and ignoring the best players of the generation. But at some point that won't stand anymore and won't hold anymore. And so that's sort of my sort of take on that.
Thank you so very much, and I appreciate disclosing how you voted. That was really something, and amen.
Oh, absolutely.
Now I really know why I like those books. Thank you.
Awesome. Steve?
Well, I wanted to say, first of all, that the Joe blogs, I look forward to every day. Now, you can get the free version, and then he cuts off the good stuff. Pay a couple of bucks. It's not a lot. Get the regular version. It's a great way to start the day reading the blogs. I really love those. What I wanted to say is this, because growing up in New Jersey, I found that friends who liked either the Yankees or the Mets, it depended on when they started liking baseball. And my first memory is a 7-year-old in 1961, and I remember Maris and Mantle chasing Ruth. And I remember in 1962, my first memory of looking at a newspaper was seeing the Mets were 0-8. So I like the Yankees and the Mets. Why is that wrong? Why do people look down on me? Why are all of you judging me? I'm sorry. Yankees and Mets, I'm a fan of both.
Great.
Is that possible?
Well,
I'm a fan of the Giants and the Yankees because my grandfather rooted for both in the Polo Grounds.
That's easier than Yankees Mets though. Look, here's my you've read Joe Blas, so you know what my answer is going to be, which is that there's never an excuse for being a Yankees fan. That's like there's never ever an excuse for that at all. No, of course it's perfectly fine. I've never really, I mean, it's fun because the Yankees and Mets are obviously both in New York and competing and this. They're not in the same league. Like there's no, most people I know have an American League team and a National League team. And if you were going to have and that's becoming less and less possible, by the way, with sort of the collapse of the leagues. But if you're going to have an American League team and a National League team, and you live in New York, it kind of makes sense, really, to have both be a Yankee fan and a Met fan. And it's only really come down once, right? It's only been the one World Series where Clemens threw the bat at Piazza. Other than that, it's really been pretty clear sailing as far as Yankees and Mets. So I have no problem with it. I'm just saying, for me, I have no problem with it.
And you know, it's funny, in 2000, during the World Series, while I was watching it, somebody would score, I'd root. I'd be happy. The other team would score, I'd be happy. My wife said to me, "Who are you rooting for?" And I said, "I don't know."
That's great. That's
Yeah,
great.
I've had the same problem when the Giants played the Yankees on Mariano Rivera Day. Now, Mariano is my professional role model, but I couldn't root. So I was wearing his out. I wanted to wear his outfit, but I couldn't disrespect the Giants. And at the same time, who do I root for? So I gave up. I just rooted for good baseball.
Yeah. I just rooted for 7 games.
Nice. Nice. Okay,
You
Jeffrey.
got 6.
Yeah.
No, 5.
Jeffrey, you're muted.
Thank you. I appreciated your saying about my first question about Bud Selig being a baseball fan. That was clear. I mean, when Hank Aaron died, it was moving how Selig reacted to Aaron's passing. I was thinking about I've been a baseball fan a long time. I was thinking about Kennesaw Mountain Landis and M. Donald Grant. I don't think either of them was a baseball fan. I've been a Mets fan for almost forever. And I warmly remember Joan Payson seeing her at Shea Stadium, waving, a society lady, and her and the horses, but also a huge baseball fan. But she also hired M. Donald Grant. And Kennesaw Landis, I understand why the owners hired him after the White Sox scandal. Anyway, I'm just wondering, appreciate your comments about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me tell you a quick Bud Selig story. When the Baseball 100, most of you probably know this. So the Baseball 100 first ran online. It actually ran online multiple times because I started it on my own Joe Blogs newsletter blog at that time, and then it stopped, and then I started it up again, and then I wrote it for The Athletic, which is the version. I mean, I rewrote it some, but it's the general version that appeared in the book. And the day that I wrote about Henry Aaron, I'm at the dinner table with my wife and daughters, and my phone rings, and it's a Milwaukee number. And I don't want to answer it because I'm like, I figured it was probably a Milwaukee radio station that wanted to, do something, and it was dinner time, whatever. And my wife said, you should answer it. And I answered it, and it was Bud Selig. And Bud had called me to tell me how much he loved what I had written about Henry Aaron, which was very kind of him. And he went on and on, best thing I've ever read about him, and this and that and the other. And he wanted to tell me stories about Hank Aaron, and it was very sweet. He and I have had a long relationship, good and bad. I mean, there are many, many things with him that I've disagreed, but I've always thought he was a great baseball fan, and so it was very touching and nice for him to say that. But then at the end, he goes, "So let me ask you a question. You've got Henry Aaron at number 4 on this list." And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay, I've got that Babe Ruth is ahead of him." I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "And I've got that Willie Mays. You probably put Willie Mays ahead of him." And he said he would not have. He would have put Henry Aaron ahead of Willie Mays, which, fair, good argument. And he goes, "I got those two. Who is the third player that's in front of him?" And I said, "It's Barry Bonds." That I put Barry Bonds at number 3. And he wasn't as kind after that. So that's sort of what it's like to have Bud. But I mean, I think one of the this both of these books, particularly, no, both of them. I mean, Why We Love Baseball maybe a little bit more just because it was the follow up, but both these books have led to the most remarkable sort of things that have happened, and people who are just very intensive baseball fans who wanted to sort of share with me what it is that they love about this game. And it's really cool. And like, I got a letter a few weeks ago from Tom Hanks, and it was a very long, like 8-page letter about typewritten, all typewritten. You know, he's a big typewriter guy, and he had typewritten this very long letter about his experience as a baseball fan when he was in Cleveland doing summer, summer stock theater, and what a big fan he was of the Cleveland team, and he listed off a bunch of his favorite players. And I mean, it was just this beautiful letter, which is really cool to get a letter like that from Tom Hanks. Very, very special. I've gotten multiple letters like that from President Bush, President George W. Bush. And, you know, once again, it's sort of like everything that I've come to realize. You can feel about somebody however you want to feel about them. But as baseball fans, it's a different thing. You connect to them on a whole different level. And President Bush is a huge, great baseball fan. Willie Mays was his favorite player. And so it doesn't matter who you are, right? It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, how people feel about you, whatever. None of that matters when it comes to talking baseball, and all you want to do is share this love you have of the game. And it so connects us, in ways that are beyond almost anything else. And it's really, really cool. So I don't think there are any more questions. So I want to close out, if I can, with a story from the book that I think you guys will appreciate. So when I thought about moments that I wanted in this book, the only question I asked myself throughout the entire thing was, is this moment, does it represent why we love baseball? Not how important this moment was, not how significant to history, not, is this moment a reflection of what it is we love about the game? And that led me in many different directions, as those of you who've read the book know, right? So now suddenly it doesn't matter that Bartolo Colon's home run didn't matter in the larger frame of things. Obviously, it's in the book. It's one of the first moments that I had in the book, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So, one moment I was absolutely not going to include in the book, was not going to put in, was the Al Gianfrido catch in the 1946 World Series, 47 World Series, excuse me, of Joe DiMaggio. I'm sure most of you know the story. DiMaggio hits the long fly ball. Gianfrido goes back to the wall, makes this, at the time, considered legendary catch. There's film and footage of DiMaggio as he's rounding the bag, kicking at the dirt in frustration, which is obviously one of the iconic moments in baseball history. The moment that Joe DiMaggio, the impossible to understand, inscrutable Joe DiMaggio finally shows frustration at the game and kicks in the dirt. So that moment is so famous, but I wasn't going to include it in because I've seen the video, I've seen the film, and I don't care what anybody says, it's just not that good a catch. And no matter how many times I watch it, because I mean, it's such a famous moment, but it's just not that good a catch. He's stumbling. They said he saved a home run. He's nowhere near the wall when he catches it. He's stumbling around. Like, this moment, this is a fake moment. Like, I don't know if their eyesight was bad in 47 or what, but like, this is just not a good catch. So I'm not going to include it. And then as the book was going on, and I'm doing the research and seeing how many times the moment is referenced, I'm like, I guess I need to look at this moment again. I did, but I just don't think it belongs in my book. So I go back and I find the most remarkable thing. I'm reading it, and they're all talking about what an unbelievable catch this was. Saved a home run, changed the game, greatest catch in World Series history. Like, what are they even looking at? I don't even understand at all. And I'm like, were they still talking about this like the next day? So I looked at the next day. And when I looked at the next day and looked up Al Gianfrido, the most remarkable thing happened. I realized for the first time, and I don't know that anybody's ever reported this because I couldn't find anybody. In fact, to the point where I was nervous about writing this because it has never been reported as I understand it, not since 46, 47 rather. What you see on film is not the catch. What you see on film is a reproduction of the catch. What happened was the newsreels didn't get the catch. They didn't have it. They had some angle of it, but it was way out in the outfield and they didn't have a camera on it and they didn't have the catch. So in those days, the newsreels had this kind of power where the next game, so before game 7 of the World Series, literally right before, minutes before game time, they send Al Gianfrido and a teammate out to the outfield, and they hit fungos to him and told him, reproduce the catch as best you can. And if you, and I mean, this is again, right, but could you imagine for game 7 of the World Series, they are like, hey, we didn't get a good angle of your catch, Mike Trout. Why don't you run back out there? That's not realistic because then Mike Trout would have to be in the World Series. But you know what I'm saying. You know the point I'm making. So they reproduced the catch, and it's so mind blowing to me, and so fascinating to me. And my favorite part now is I still will go on YouTube all the time and I'll watch the catch because my favorite part is one of the things that they told the crowd before the game is they said, okay, we're reproducing this catch, this legendary catch that he made. So when he makes the catch, everybody cheer like he just saved the World Series. Just cheer and cheer like he just saved the World Series. And if you watch the actual film now, what you'll see is he makes the catch, and some people behind him jump up and cheer, and other people are kind of like looking at their watch, like, how long is this going to go on? Are we just going to be like forever just like watching? Like, this isn't baseball. Like, they're just hitting fly balls to the guy. Like, what's going on here? And I love that. I love that so much. So that was like sort of, I found, I think, a lot of incredibly cool moments, cool stories about moments for the book. But I think that's my favorite was finding out that the Al Gianfrido catch that we've been told for, 50, 60, 70 years is not the real catch. And I love that very much. So with that, I think we can call it a day. So thank you all so much for having me here.